Hello everyone. We're back to school this week, and although it's virtual, things have been going really well. I got to welcome back some of the returning students as well as meet some new ones. As far as the Auto 3s, we've been talking about some plans to get those guys incorporated into at least the next 9 weeks worth of episodes, so hopefully we'll have some of that stuff to share with you pretty soon. This week's episode is primarily about the Harley bike as well as the OC3 crawler, and a little bit about some purchases that I made recently. Hope you enjoy it. Last week you saw me put the paint on the fender, but now we're going to clear coat it. This is actually the same day that I painted it a week ago, but I had to get my editing done. Here's the fender clear coated. Now we'll get ready to put this thing back on the bike. Now that the front fender is cleared and dry, let's get it back on the bike. Now that the wheel's back under the fender, we're getting ready to put the axle through it. I want to point out though that the caps for the forks only go on one direction. A lot of times there'll be an arrow telling you to put it to face it forward. This one has the word out stamped on it, so we know that it goes to the outside. And the reason for that is when these forks are made, they actually hone that size for the axle before they cut it in half. So this is actually all one piece before they do that, and then once it's done and cut, they'll mark it for the outside so that we know it only goes on one way. If you don't put it back on that way, there's a chance that it won't grab the axle fully and hold it in place. Had a bit of a minor setback while putting the front wheel on. I was quick to notice is that the spacers are too long. The rear wheel worked out pretty well, so I'm not sure what the difference is, but I can tell you that the front wheel, the bearings are further apart with the same spacer in the middle. I'm sure it's because it's a different type of bearing, but anyway, I've checked it a couple times. I'm pretty confident that I'm going to need to do this. So I'm going to machine some of the material off this. I've already measured it, got everything set up nice and true, and I know how much I need to take off this spacer to get this side of the wheel put on, and then we're going to have to do the same thing for the other side. Unfortunately, I had to pull the steering pin that I was making for the grader out of the lathe so I could put the spacer in, but it's chucked up in there now so we can get to work on that. We'll have to finish this another day. I want to make sure we're sneaking up on it. I've got the caliper set to the depth I need. Just keep checking it. Still got almost a 1/4 inch to go, give or take. And we'll be about ready to go check it against the bike. The spacer on the other side is taken care of, but to do this one, it's going to be a little bit trickier. This is the one that actually houses the speedometer gear, so I had to pull the speedometer cable out of it and then get it set up in the lathe. But what I have to do here, since I can't measure it the same way I measured the other one, I'm going to take this piece of the stick here and I'm going to start nipping at it just a little bit at a time until we can actually get it to fit in there, almost like using a feeler gauge. And then that's going to be the measurement I'm going to go with. The nice thing is, we are doing this to within thousandths of an inch, or at least trying to, but we're not going to need to worry about that. It doesn't need to be that perfect because there's a little bit of flex in the forks, so when we go to tighten it down, as long as it clamps tight against the bearings and the races and the nuts tight, it's going to be fine. So that's what we're going to do here. We're going to keep working on this until we get it close. Now that we're close, what I'm going to do is take a piece of sandpaper and start gradually getting a little bit more of it off on the end until it fits in there snugly, and then that's going to be the gauge that we're going to use to machine the other half. Both pieces are machined and the wheel's back together. I need to take it back apart now and put the speedometer cable back into the housing and then put the whole assembly back together one more time, get everything torqued down, then we should be good. I tried to get in front of the camera on this one, but it's going to be easier to explain it this way. The wheel is on it, the spin's nice, it's very true, so all the machining was done very well, except that the piece on this side, I didn't quite take enough off of it so that the rotor is rubbing against the brake pad a little bit on the inboard side. And it's fine for right now. Like I said, it's spinning and it works okay. But I'm thinking down the road, when I put new pads on it, it's going to rub that pad a little more, cause it to drag and wear out prematurely. So what I'm going to do, rather than take this piece back out and machine a little bit more off of it, which is this side is really hard to set up, and move the rotor out this way some, what I'm going to do is take the caliper off and I'm going to machine the bracket stay for the caliper a little bit, or grind a little bit of that off, or file some of that off rather. So I'm going to move the caliper in just a little bit. And that's going to basically do the same thing, and that way when I go to put new pads on it, they'll fit like they normally would. So this has all been a work in progress, as you guys know if you've been keeping up with it, and there's more than one way to make something work. So that's going to be the easiest way for me to do it. I'm definitely going to have more control by machining the bracketry here than trying to pull that other piece back off and get it set back up in the lathe. This is my son Michael on my drag bike. I've won 3 track titles with it, as well as 1 national championship. This is the first time he's been on it, so I'm making him take it easy to get used to it. He's ridden a lot of dirt bikes, so this is definitely a different animal. The other reason he's taking it easy is because there's no back brake. It's seasoned up, so I told him not to use it. So he's just being a little cautious. But we'll get all that ironed out soon, and then we'll really show you what this thing can do. I'm ready to get back to work on this OC3 dozer. If you remember from a few weeks ago, we do have it running and the hydraulic system works, but this front idler was pretty much destroyed, as I showed you before. What I need to do is run it again and get it to move, because in order to get the tracks loose, there's a pin down here, that one right there, that we have to remove in order to get the tracks separated. There's a closer look at it. That pin doesn't look like the rest of them. That one is actually removable. So we're going to have to get the tracks up top, somewhere up in this area, so we can actually get the pin out and get the tracks separated so we can get that idler off. Before I fire it up again though, I want to take care of the wiring. The starter wiring, the coil, even down to the distributor. The gauge is a little small, there's some openings in some of it, so I want to get it all straightened out and neated up before we actually move to take off the track. I started by pulling out the toggle switch that controls the ignition on and off, and this is what I found. See, the wires just wrapped around the pins there. It's a little ridiculous, but unfortunately that's what a lot of people do. So we're going to fix this first and then work our way through the rest of it. This end was connected to the coil, so it wasn't much better. You guys have seen me and the students do this a bunch of times. We're going to put these eyelet connectors on, but we're not going to use them as a crimp connector style. What I've done is I've taken the crimp piece off of it, so we're left with just the eyelet itself. Then what I'm going to do, I've got the wire fed through it, and I have it sitting up. So I'm going to take and feed solder straight down through it. Then I'm going to heat shrink it, and it's going to be better than if we had just crimped it. Have the solder flow down into it, and look how much better that looks. We'll put the heat shrink around it now, and it'll be as good as factory. Get the heat shrink pushed up all the way over this end of it, so it can actually get to the copper itself. Heat it up a little bit, shrink it. There we go. Sealed from corrosion. All set up to do the other end, so let's go ahead and get this one soldered on. Heat shrink up to this one. There we go. Now we can put this one on the coil. This one was running from the coil to the distributor. This end was actually on the coil itself. This end was a distributor. It did have an eyelet on it, which is nice, but all this right here is melted through, so it's been hot somewhere, and they just twisted 2 ends here when they added this piece of wire. So a little ridiculous. We've got one wire we're going to make up with 2 eyelets on the end, and then we'll get this one back together. This is a positive ground machine, so this is what would be considered the ground side. This side was going to the switch itself, and you can see the nonsense they have going on here. So we're going to replace that wire to the terminal itself for the switch side, and that pretty much does it for the wiring, except for wiring in the ammeter, which we'll do next. I've got each end of the wires tinned, so I'm going to put them together now. these fused. There we go. Now, since these wires are two different sizes, I have to use two different sizes of heat shrink for each wire, which is not a problem. We're going to bring the two together and then heat shrink one over top of the other. So what we're going to do is bring the smaller one in first, like that. Get it as far up on there as we can. Then bring this one in, overlap the two together, and then we'll heat shrink these. Much better than that nonsense that somebody else had put on there. This is an original Oliver ammeter. Hopefully we can get it working again. Someone had before cut both of the terminal ends off. I guess they couldn't figure out how to wire it up, or I don't know what they were doing, but that was a long time ago, it looks like. But we're going to get that wired up for the alternator, see if we can get the charging system working, and then hopefully be able to use this original Oliver gauge. I was at an estate sale recently and picked up a few things. First, this 12-foot open trailer. Then this 1954 Ford Jubilee, of which I have one of, so I got this one for parts. And this International 350 utility, of which I barely owned for a day. I picked it up one morning at 5:30, and by the afternoon of the next day I already had it delivered to a guy that collects Internationals and wanted this one for his. So I no longer own this one. Next time on Bulldog Builds, we'll have the Harley front wheel back together and put back on the motorcycle lift. We'll get back to work on the steering pin for that old grader, and we'll get the OC3 fired back up, move it, and get that track removed. See you next week.